Starting with an increasingly out-of-touch Republican Party, one Republican congressman said this week that we should do a little more for the rich. And that's just one example of how their messaging on the economy and the Iran war is hurting them ahead of the November midterms. Meanwhile, Democratic momentum is building in Texas, with both the Senate and gubernatorial races polling extremely closely. We'll talk to Gina Hinojosa, the Democratic candidate for governor. Later, Maine Congresswoman Shelley Pingree joins us to talk about the latest escalation from ICE, with the agency planning to spend millions on gloves that deliver painful electric shocks. We'll ask her about that and the congressional field hearing on ICE that she's holding in Maine next week. But let's start this hour. President Trump's out-of-touch narrative on everything from the economy to his Iran war. With the president under pressure from his war of choice becoming a drag on the economy and his party in the midterm elections, Trump's message to Americans seems to be just accept it, like his take on soaring gas prices from his appearance on Friday.
For you to pay a tiny little bit more for your gasoline, just remember you're doing it so that a very evil country cannot have a country. Really, it's the number one state sponsor of terror in the world. We don't want to have them have a nuclear weapon.
All of this comes as the president's focus remains squarely on vanity projects like his ballroom construction. Renderings included in his emergency request to the Supreme Court to continue construction show that he plans to affix gold-colored presidential seals to the outside of the ballroom. Meanwhile, he's attempting to shift focus, touting misleading crime statistics to use public safety as part of Republicans' midterm messaging, even as Americans have said that the economy is still their top concern. Just the latest in a pattern of tone-deaf comments and patronizing comments from Trump and Republicans about Americans' economic worries.
The economy is doing unbelievably from the standpoint of Wall Street. We just set another record, as you know.
People living in poverty are just not very, they're not very experienced at navigating the real world.
Don't let anybody tell you that people running Congress right now are looking out for the rich. Actually, I think we should do a little more for them.
The economy is the greatest economy we've ever had by far.
Maybe you take one less trip to Starbucks, and so that gas goes a little further until this thing is over and these gas prices come back down again. Let's just try to be patriots about this.
So remember that when you have to pay a little bit more, you're at $4. It's okay. I mean, it's I'll never apologize. I did the right thing.
Joined now by Jackie Kucinich, Washington bureau chief at the Boston Globe, and Scott MacFarlane, chief Washington correspondent for Midas Touch and host of Scott MacFarlane Reports. Good morning, guys. Thanks for joining us. Jackie, I want to start with you. It seems like we have sort of transcended the possibility of the president himself being able to fix this mess by exhibiting some message discipline, that this is now an entrenched policy problem. Do you think I'm right about that assessment?
I mean, he has this entire time, this isn't isolated to what's happening, right in the comments that you just showed. Since the affordability issue really took rise, particularly exacerbated by the war in Iran, he has said affordability is a hoax. He has said it just stepped on Republican messaging on this, to the extent that there has been any messaging on this. Whenever he walks out of the door, whenever he walks down the stairs of Air Force One, whichever one it is. So at this point, that isn't a surprise. It is, but what is surprising is that some of these other Republicans, because they're closer to the voters, are also stepping on this message at this point because their very electability depends on this. The president isn't running again. These guys are on the ballot in just a couple of months.
Let's say, though, that the president suddenly decided tomorrow to say, yes, you're right. Affordability is real. I hear your concerns. But even if that does happen, does that even make a difference at this point?
I mean, it would have to be followed by results, right? because Republicans have allowed this war to continue. Like, let's be real about that, because they haven't, tried to take that power back, because Congress is in theory supposed to approve this happening. They have some Republicans have crossed the line at this point and tried to take back, even nominally take back that responsibility, but they haven't. But I perhaps not, Jackie, but it's one of those things that we'll never know, because I'm just, as long as we've been covering collectively, President Trump, message discipline has never really been his forte.
No, it's both a messaging problem and, as you said, Jackie Kucinich, and I think Jackie also agrees, a policy problem. I want to go to you, Scott. I want to throw up this. The president is up this morning at 7:19. He posted this on Truth Social. This is a full screen from a video. It's a 10-second video, I think, of him walking around with George Washington. Obviously, it's AI, folks. Him walking around. I don't understand. I think it's supposed to be a joke. I'm not sure what it is, but it's 7:19 on a Sunday. Tomorrow is the day that the Iran war, quote unquote, ceasefire. They're still shooting each other, so that that ends. There are primaries on Tuesday where Byron Donalds, one of his allies, is going to be. He is a voter in Florida. There are all types of concerns. And at 7:19 in the morning, that's what the president of the United States is posting on Truth Social. Meanwhile, they are asking him and, different candidates, Republican candidates, are asking the American people to be patriots about having to spend too much money. Maybe they should drink a little less Starbucks. And instead of worrying about gas prices. And I'm curious, when you put those two things together, Scott, what does that tell you about where we are as a country?
I have a lot of new reporting to unfurl about this, but speaking of Starbucks, I'm told Eugene thinks matcha tastes like dirt.
It's terrible, Scott.
As in most cases, I'm on Team Eugene. I'm on Team Eugene.
Thank
I got you.
This man drinks Celsius. Celsius is like poisoning yourself.
I do the powder, to be fair. Go ahead, Scott.
At 7:13 a.m.
They're both bad, Eugene. I drink them both, but they're both bad.
I spent time on the campaign trail without Celsius in Michigan and in Pennsylvania. Let me tell you about the Pennsylvania and Michigan 10th congressional districts. You have two Democratic candidates there trying to synthesize these things. Trump's paying for a ballroom. We can't pay for basic needs in this country. And they're doing a good job synthesizing those messages. You don't do one or the other. You do them both. Janelle Stelson is the Democratic candidate trying to oust Scott Perry. She did a housing affordability event this week where she talked about making it easier for people in their 30s to buy a house. And she mentioned how so much money is going to a ballroom. Christina Hines, former prosecutor, actually a local prosecutor in Michigan, trying to win a suburban Detroit district, talks about affordability, but also talks about the weaponization of the Department of Justice and how that runs counter to the public's needs. But here's the thing, and there's no way around this. We are in a precious real estate scenario here with time. There are only 80 days till the election. Some voting begins in a month, and every day there's an AI-generated video with George Washington is a lost day. You've lost precious time. You've lost precious real estate to affect a message.
And the war on Iran is not seeming to get any better or towards a breaking point or any kind of peace anytime soon, certainly. And Jackie, I guess I would go to you on that. Chris Christie had what I thought was the best encapsulation of Trump's war with Iran. And he said that this war has made Trump into Jimmy Carter because Trump is now being held hostage by the Strait of Hormuz. And there's reporting in Semaphore about how the extended Iran conflict, that it risks the Trump-Carter comparisons, building on that. How do you think that the White House and Trump is actually handling the failure of this war that has basically fulfilled every worst expectation that experts had been predicting for decades, that what would happen if the United States went to war with Iran?
I mean, I think you can look no further than the shifting messaging. Is it a ceasefire? Are they being bombed again? Are there negotiations going on? It shifts depending on the day, the hour, the minute. So that sort of erratic messaging, but also, from what we can tell, actions, shows you that they're trying to find a way out of this. We know the president doesn't want to be a part of this anymore. It is dragging down the economy. But at this point, because of how they have conducted this from start to, TK finish, this has all the makings of something that could end up a forever war. They don't know how he wants out, but he's in too deep at this point, and they don't know how to bring this to an end.
And Scott, going forward for Democrats, because you were just in Michigan and ran through some of the more effective messaging that you've heard, I'm wondering who else you think is doing a good job at sort of marrying these corruption, war, affordability topics into, again, a more coherent and accessible conversation for voters, and how you think Democrats can maybe be capitalizing on that even more.
Some of the military veterans in the U.S. House have been distinctively impactful with their messaging. I talked to Chris DeLuzio, military veteran from Western Pennsylvania, talking about the hellscape that appears to be underway for some service members on the USS Abraham Lincoln, saying this is a ridiculously long deployment, but also that it's symptomatic of poor planning. And the Congress is going to soon be asked to spend, I'm not sure if it's tens of billions or hundreds of billions of dollars on the war in Iran. How are they going to say yes when there are all these symptoms of poor planning? Look at New York Democrat Pat Ryan, Colorado Democrat Jason Crow, uniquely effective messengers for this moment to help lift their party in the home stretch.
You know, Jackie, in the time that we have left, Jackie Kucinich, Jackie Alemany's not going anywhere at all. When you look at where the Democrats are focusing, one of the things that has been so interesting to me is that kind of across the board, whether they be progressive or consider themselves moderate or part of the quote unquote establishment, the question of pricing is at the top of their list. And, you know, we always have conversations as reporters. There's like, you know, the Democrats are in disarray. They seem very in array on that issue. But one of the things that when I talk to some voters, what they say is, well, they're going to have to make good on that. I guess when you think about it, someone who's been covering D.C. for a long time, when you think about, let's say they win the House in November, they won't have a veto-proof majority in the House and the Senate. Donald Trump isn't signing any bills that they put on his desk. How do they navigate that? How do they navigate the kind of people looking at them and saying, wait, you made promises and you didn't, even though they won't have the power to make good on every single one of those promises?
Well, I think the promises that are being made by the National Party and you're absolutely right, it has to do with affordability, are going to be probably at times loggerheads with some of the more some of the more progressive members might be pushing. And that's going to be the hardest thing, particularly for someone like Hakeem Jeffries, assuming that if they win, he ends up becoming speaker, that you will have these competing priorities. I mean, you could have, depending on what the president does, in the coming months, days, minutes, you could have an impeachment push. You could have other things that would take the eye off the ball when it comes to affordability. But, Democrats have a very short time to show voters that they can lead, because you're right. They could turn around and lose it again 2 years later. And I'm not trying to predict the future here, or, my crystal ball has been broken for quite some time. I'm down to my magic 8 ball. But there is going to be a real challenge to keep everyone going in the same direction, even if they are able to flip the House and or the Senate.
Jackie Kucinich and Scott MacFarlane saying I'm right. I thank you both for our caffeine fight. We're going to continue.